YouTube, welcome to my channel, Anna Bella, and today I'm actually going to be doing another film review for you all. I'm going to be reviewing Jane and Emma. It is an LDS film, which basically stands for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It came out in 2018 and it shows the flaws and strengths of both Jane Manning and Emma Smith. Now, these women are unique in LDS Mormon culture. Emma Smith is the wife to the first prophet Joseph Smith and classed as an elect lady. Jane Manning is a free African American, so she's a black woman, a woman of colour, who the prophet Joseph Smith called a visionary because Jane Manning had dreams and visions very similar to Harriet Tubman in that kind of way. Only Jane Manning her and her whole family walked to Nauvoo. Yeah, it is. It's another stranger than fiction story. It has flashbacks throughout. The film starts with Jane Manning having one of her dreams, and she dreams that she has to go back to Nauvoo to see Emma. It is part historical fiction. Some of it didn't happen, some of it did, but it's rather unique, and it is quite scary in parts. Jane Manning has a terrible nightmare because she's working as a seamstress, and she takes the horse which Joseph Smith gave her. She rides back and finds Emma totally bereft because the prophet has been shot. So it's after the martyrdom of Joseph Smith, the first prophet of the church, and Hyrum Smith, the first patriarch of the church. They've both been shot, and Joseph is there lying in Emma's house, and she won't let anybody in. She won't let any of the priesthood in. She won't let any of the Relief Society in. She just won't let anybody in. All her children have gone to stay at Lucy Mack Smith's house. That's Joseph's mother, Emma Smith's mother-in-law. And all the dialogue comes from actual accounts from people at the time. We get flashbacks to Jane Manning arriving at Nauvoo when Joseph Smith was alive, and her first meetings with the prophet and how he treated her and other black African American members of the church. It is totally fascinating because the LDS church and the BAME community have, particularly in America, have huge issues. Weirdly enough, in other countries, you don't get these issues. Like Hawaii, you don't get those issues. Some of the other little islands, it is absolutely fascinating. The racism seems to be only a USA kind of issue as the church goes forward. It is fascinating. Okay, so the film is controversial because it occurs just like the martyrdom happened the previous day, and we have this whole night. What isn't commonly known is both bodies were returned to Nauvoo the day after they were murdered. It is absolutely fascinating. There are huge issues because Joseph Smith and Hyrum had prices on their heads. They were worried about grave robbers. You're not quite sure whether it was paranoia or whether it was justified because of the persecution towards the church. 3, at the funeral, they did have a funeral, but with 2 decoy caskets, and the bodies were actually underneath the red brick store. They weren't buried in the graves till much later because of this. Jane Manning is a fascinating figure. She actually did baptisms for the dead for her family. Jane Manning was born free. The Manning family first travelled with some saints as a group, but they weren't allowed on the canal boat, whether they didn't have the money or whether it was just racism. I suspect it was a combination of the two. They weren't allowed, so they had to walk because they were black. They weren't allowed on this canal boat. Not very saintly of anybody. And they had to walk. So they walked, and they walked till their shoes had gone and they had literally blood on their feet. And then what happened was Joseph offered the Manning family work, and Jane Manning became an in-house domestic maid for Emma. But people assumed that Joseph and Emma had a slave. Hence why there are lines in this movie about your girl, and it's like, no, she's being paid for her work. It's free and honest labour. What is controversial is Emma wrote to Joseph Smith and asked him to turn himself in, hence why he ends up in Carthage. Jane Manning's family was almost imprisoned in Illinois, even though they were free black people. And Jane lived with Brigham Young's family after the martyrdom and during the Exodus. So in that period where she lived with Joseph and Emma's family, her and her family did, Joseph gets martyred, and Hiram, they both get martyred. She then goes and lives with Brigham Young's family, and then when the Exodus happens and they go west to found Salt Lake City and build the state, the territory of Utah, or Deseret, Utah after the Indians, Jane Manning is with the second prophet of the church. Highly, highly interesting, and she just shows you how important Jane Manning was considered to be. The film itself actually does have quite a few jump scares. There's a pistol in it. There are scenes of blood. There are running around in night skirts with lanterns in the middle of the night because people have had dreams. It is a fascinating film. It's a character sketch of looking at Emma's flaws and looking at Jane Manning, looking at her as a whole person, of both of them. They both have flaws and they both have strengths. And it's quite interesting because Jane Manning said, yes, Emma, Joseph Smith was your husband, but he also was seen as the prophet of a whole church. So you need to let them in, and you need to let the church grieve as well. And it's fascinating. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fresh, a new look at LDS history in a completely new way, something that we don't consider, because Emma Smith did not go to Utah. She wasn't part of that. She stayed. So did Lucy Mack Smith. They stayed, and the reason that they stayed was that Joseph, Hiram, Joseph Sr. and Samuel Smith were all buried in the cemetery. They didn't want to leave their family. They'd put down roots. They'd moved so many times they didn't want to leave. And that's perfectly understandable because Emma had children. She needed to raise them, and actually her and Brigham Young just didn't get on. There was a personality clash. It was like oil and water, weirdly enough. And you needed Joseph to help mediate between the two. As Joseph said of Emma, you don't know Emma like I know Emma. And he said that quite a lot because Emma could be very, very stubborn, which is a good trait if you're going to be persecuted. You know, and she worried about, well, what am I going to live on? Me and the children have to live, Joseph. We need provisions. So before he went to Carthage, he actually made provisions to separate church property from his personal property and at least attempt to do some of that. After his death, it did become trickier, but she did manage to get her estate out, which is understandable. For a single parent of however many children and an elderly mother to take care of as well, they needed something to live on. It is a fascinating story, this. Yes, it's probably, most of it is contrived because we don't know what happened that night when Joseph Smith's body came back to Emma's house, because Hiram's body went back to his family and Hiram's family went west with everybody else. Emma's did not. And because at one point the elders turn up and they want to take Joseph and they want to put him with Hiram, and Emma's like, no, he's staying here, he's staying with me tonight. And he said, but you won't be safe. And that's highly interesting and just shows how stubborn and gritty she is, because she needed the time. But it took Jane Manning to tell her, actually, you need to let everybody in to see him. Yes, I get that he's your husband, but the picture is bigger here. Even if historically this particular night didn't happen, the actual story of Jane Manning did happen, and she did follow the saints west, and she lived as a faithful member of the church for the rest of her life, even though she couldn't access some of the temple ordinances. Fascinating, the faithfulness of one person. Absolutely fascinating. It is a huge story. within LDN's history. Fascinating. Anyway, I'm going to give it out of 5. I'm going to give it a 4. It had some really good soul music provided by the most excellent Bonner family and other music. This film feels very, very raw and tender, and it is complicated because it's not straightforward. It's based on faith. It's brilliant. I enjoyed it. 4 out of 5. Like, comment and subscribe. Let me know what you thought about it. If you've seen this movie, Jamie and Emma, it is fascinating. Even if you just look at it from a historical perspective, not religious perspective, fascinating because you're dealing with the subculture. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. The tender feelings that these two women clearly had for each other. And they enjoyed each other's company, and it shows you the friendship and kinship of two women from very, very different backgrounds accepting each other, and some harsh truths are told. Like, comment and subscribe. Stay safe wherever you are, and yeah, thank you for the support.